I was always the odd one out. The rebellious child, the dreamer, the problematic sibling. Growing up, my family never seemed to understand me. My parents had their own vision of success, a vision that involved taking over the family business, which had been passed down for generations. They wanted me to step into the role of CEO one day, to carry on the legacy, but I wasn't like them. While my older siblings took on roles in the company, learning every aspect of it, I felt suffocated. The more I saw my family pouring their lives into the business, the more I felt disconnected. Their world seemed so rigid, so predictable, and I hated it. I wanted more than just a safe, secure life that revolved around profit margins and corporate meetings. I dreamed of creating something new, something of my own. I was passionate about design, about building something that expressed my own creativity. At first, my family thought it was just a phase. "You'll come around," my mother would say, trying to gently nudge me toward the business world. But I never did. I hated the idea of working in a place that felt so disconnected from who I was. So I decided to go to art school. I wanted to become a graphic designer, to do something that inspired me. I remember the day I told my parents. It was a typical Sunday afternoon. My father was sitting in his favorite armchair, reading the newspaper, while my mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The air was thick with the usual familial tension. I could feel it in my bones. "I'm going to art school," I said, my voice trembling a little. There was a long pause. My father lowered his newspaper slowly, staring at me, his face unreadable. My mother turned around from the stove, her expression a mixture of confusion and frustration. "What do you mean, art school?" my father finally asked, his voice cold. "You know that's not practical. You need to help run the business." "I don't want to run the business," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I want to do something that makes me happy." The look on my father's face was one I'd never forget. He didn't even try to hide his disappointment. "This is not the time for childish dreams. We've built something here, and you have a responsibility." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. But in that moment, I knew I had to stand my ground. "I'm not you," I said quietly, before turning and walking out of the room. From that day on, I was the black sheep. My family never really forgave me for going against their plan. My siblings, who had all followed in my father's footsteps, couldn't understand why I'd chosen to throw away what they saw as the only real path to success. They often made jokes about my decision, calling me naive or foolish. I tried not to let it bother me, but deep down, I felt the sting. Art school wasn't easy. I struggled with finances and self-doubt. There were times when I wondered if I had made the right decision, especially when I saw the success my siblings were having with the family business. They were thriving, expanding, and making deals that would secure their futures. I, on the other hand, was scraping by with freelance gigs, working late into the night, and questioning if my dream was even possible. Still, I pushed forward, clinging to the belief that eventually I'd make it. That one day, I'd be able to build something that would be just as meaningful to me as their business was to them. Years passed. I built a small design agency, worked with clients who appreciated my unique style, and finally started gaining some recognition in the creative world. It wasn't easy, but I was making it on my own terms. My family continued to thrive in the business, but there was always this unspoken divide between us. Every time I visited them, I could feel the tension. They'd ask about my work, but it always felt like they were just waiting for me to admit that I'd made a mistake. Then, one day, the phone call came. It was my brother, Mark. He was panicked, his voice tight with urgency. "We need your help," he said, without any pleasantries. "The business is in serious trouble. We don't know what to do." I felt my stomach drop. The family business, the one I had always tried to distance myself from, was in crisis. My brother went on to explain that years of poor decisions, bad investments, and an outdated business model had left the company drowning in debt. They were facing bankruptcy, and none of their traditional methods were working. It was all falling apart. My first instinct was to walk away. I had no obligation to help them. They had never supported my dreams. Why should I support theirs now? But then I remembered something. All those years of watching them pour their lives into something that had now become their greatest burden. And somehow, despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a responsibility. Not just because they were family, but because I had the skills that could save them. I had learned so much during my time away. My design agency had given me a sharp business sense. I understood marketing, branding, and digital transformation in ways they never did. The world was changing, and their company was stuck in the past. They had the foundation, but they lacked the innovation. I agreed to meet with Mark. The conversation was tense. I listened to their problems, and for the first time, I truly understood the magnitude of the situation. My father, who had always prided himself on being a tough businessman, was no longer in control. His health had deteriorated, and the weight of years of poor decisions was taking its toll. It was then that I realized something. Despite all the bitterness, all the hurt, this was my moment to step up. My family had always wanted me to be part of the business, but not in the way I had imagined. I wasn't going to follow in their footsteps. I wasn't going to do things the old way, but I was going to help them rebuild. The first meeting with my family was awkward, to say the least. My father, still proud but visibly worn, sat at the head of the table, flanked by my siblings. They were all there, the ones who had followed in my father's footsteps without question. And then there was me, the outsider, the one who had rejected everything they had worked so hard to build. "Why do you think you can help us?" my father asked, his tone skeptical. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The years of estrangement between us had built walls that were hard to break down, but I had no choice but to be honest. I know the digital world, marketing, and branding. I've seen where your company is lacking. You've built something strong, but it's stuck in the past. I can help you bring it into the future. My siblings exchanged looks. I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't want to admit it, but they were just as lost as I was when it came to modernizing the business. They had been so focused on maintaining the status quo that they had failed to recognize how the industry had evolved. They had become comfortable with what they knew, and it was slowly suffocating them. "I'm not saying I have all the answers," I continued, "but I'm the only one here with the experience to pivot this company. You need a fresh perspective, and that's where I come in." My father's eyes narrowed. "You think this is just a game? This business has been around for decades, and it's not some startup that can be fixed with a few tweets and social media campaigns." "I'm not talking about tweets," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm talking about rebuilding your brand, updating your image, connecting with your audience in a way you never have before." I could see them considering it. My father looked to my brother, Mark, who had been running the day-to-day operations. Mark had always been the golden child, the one who followed the rules, who always had the answers. But now I could see the desperation in his eyes. "We don't have much time left," Mark admitted, breaking the silence. "Our investors are losing faith. We're on the brink of collapse." It was a harsh truth, but one that needed to be said. The business was in dire straits. No amount of old-school strategies or experience could save it now. They needed change. And I was the only one who could give it to them. My siblings were quiet, watching me closely. They didn't trust me, but they also didn't have many options left. My father, too, was conflicted. His pride was a hard thing to swallow. But even he knew that without change, they would lose everything. "What do you need from us?" my father finally asked. It wasn't an easy thing to hear. My father had always been the one who called the shots. But now, for the first time, it felt like I was being asked to lead. "I need access to the company's financial records. I need to understand where the money's going, what's working and what's not. I also need full creative control over the brand's redesign, including marketing strategies. I'll need your trust to make the tough decisions." There was a heavy silence in the room. The weight of my words hung in the air. Finally, my father sighed and nodded. "Do what you need to do," he said. "But if this fails, it's on you." It was a lot of pressure, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control of my own destiny. This was my chance. not only to prove to my family that I was capable of more than they ever gave me credit for, but also to prove to myself that my dreams weren't as foolish as they had once seemed. Over the next few weeks, I dove deep into the company's financials. I spent long hours studying the market, analyzing competitors, and meeting with key players in the industry. The business was riddled with inefficiencies. There were outdated systems in place, poor communication, and a complete lack of engagement with the younger generation. The very people who could breathe new life into the company. One of the first things I noticed was how disconnected the business was from its audience. The brand had a strong legacy, but it was stuck in the past. It needed a fresh face, a new identity that resonated with a younger, more tech-savvy crowd. I pitched the idea of a full rebrand, including a new logo, website, and social media presence. To my surprise, my father didn't object. He understood the need for change, even if he didn't fully agree with my methods. Mark, however, had his reservations. "This isn't just a design issue," he said. "You're asking us to change everything." "I'm not asking you to change everything," I replied. "I'm asking you to evolve." And evolve we did. Slowly but surely, I began to implement the changes. I worked tirelessly with the design team, overseeing every detail of the new brand. We developed a fresh marketing campaign, targeted the right demographics, and revamped the company's entire online presence. At first, the results were slow. It felt like we were pushing against a tidal wave of resistance from both inside and outside the company. My family still didn't fully trust me, and the changes felt jarring to the old guard. But I pushed forward, refusing to let the weight of their doubts stop me. One day, about 6 months into the overhaul, I received a call from one of the company's major clients. They had noticed the changes and wanted to discuss a larger partnership. That was the moment I knew we were on the right track. The phone call with the client was a turning point. They wanted to work with us, and not just as a vendor, but as a long-term partner. This was the kind of breakthrough we had desperately needed. The brand refresh had finally caught the attention of the right people. It wasn't just the new logo or the sleek website. It was the message behind it all, the promise of innovation, quality, and relevance in a rapidly changing market. When I presented the partnership opportunity to my family, there was a noticeable shift in their attitude toward me. My father, who had been hesitant at first, now saw the value in what I was doing. His eyes sparkled with a newfound respect, and even Mark, who had been the most skeptical, was beginning to see the fruits of our labor. "Maybe you were right," Mark admitted, his tone less defensive than it had been before. This could really turn things around. It felt good to hear those words. After years of feeling dismissed, ignored, and even ridiculed by my family, the validation was sweet. But I knew that this was just the beginning. The real work had only started. We still had to ensure that our operations were as sharp as our marketing efforts, and that meant tackling the internal issues that had been plaguing the company for years. We streamlined processes, upgraded technology, and, most importantly, worked on fostering a culture of innovation. The company that once resisted change was now embracing it. It was a slow transformation, but it was happening. As we began securing more partnerships and attracting new clients, I felt a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just about saving a business or proving a point to my family. It was about building something that would stand the test of time. A business that could evolve and thrive in a world that was constantly changing. One evening, about a year after I had stepped in to help, my father called me into his office. The air between us had shifted dramatically in that time. There was no longer the coldness I had felt when I first came back. Now there was a quiet respect. "You've done more than I ever expected," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You saved this company, and you did it in a way I never could have imagined." I sat down across from him, unsure of what to say. My father had always been a man of few words, and compliments were not something he gave out easily. I Just did what had to be done, I replied. We all had a part in this, but it wouldn't have been possible without the willingness to adapt. He nodded, his face softening. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you followed your path, even if I didn't understand it at first. I thought you were throwing everything away, but you've shown me that there's more than one way to succeed. It was a moment of quiet reconciliation. My father, for all his stubbornness, had come to understand that success wasn't always about following the same old rules. Sometimes it was about breaking them, taking risks, and forging your own way. As the company began to recover, we saw the signs of growth. Our profits increased, and our brand presence became stronger than ever. What had once been a business on the brink of collapse was now on the road to recovery. But beyond the financial gains, I realized something even more important. I had proven, to myself and to my family, that I was capable of more than they had ever believed. The years of rejection, the pressure to conform, and the weight of being the black sheep had all led to this moment. It wasn't just about saving a business. It was about finding my place in a world that had never quite understood me. It was about showing my family that my path, the one I had forged on my own, had value. But the true test came when I realized something even more profound. The business was no longer just my family's legacy. It was mine too. I had built something that wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. It was about creating a company that could stand tall in a world that was constantly evolving. I was no longer the black sheep. I was the one who had saved us all. And in doing so, I had finally found my place, not just in the family, but in the world. The months following the company's turnaround were a whirlwind. We had secured new clients, expanded our reach into new markets, and most importantly, the company was no longer teetering on the edge of failure. My father, once a pillar of the past, had come to realize that my approach, the very approach that he had once dismissed, was exactly what the business needed. And as much as he hated to admit it, he was proud of what we had accomplished together. However, the real shift wasn't just in the business itself, but in my relationship with my family. After years of strained interactions, we had started to heal. My father and I had developed a new mutual respect for each other. He had finally come to understand that my unconventional path wasn't just a rebellion, but a vision, one that, in time, could not only save the company, but help it thrive. My siblings, too, began to see me in a new light. They had watched as I transformed not just the business, but also myself. I was no longer the black sheep, the child who had been the odd one out, who had dared to follow a path that didn't fit the family's mold. I had become an integral part of the legacy, and that was something that I had fought for. Yet, despite the success and the newfound unity within the family, I felt a strange sense of loss. The company was now flourishing, but I realized that I had lost something along the way, the desire for validation from my parents and siblings. In a way, I had proved myself, but it had cost me my need to seek their approval. I had spent so many years trying to fit into a mold that didn't suit me, that I had almost forgotten who I truly was. In a quiet moment of reflection, I realized that the true reward wasn't in the money, the clients, or the accolades. It was in the sense of fulfillment that came from following my own path. I had proven to myself that I didn't need anyone's validation to be successful. I was enough on my own. I decided to take a step back from the daily operations of the business, not because I didn't care, but because I had come to understand that my journey was about more than just the company. It was about what I could achieve outside the confines of my family's expectations. I had always dreamed of creating something of my own, something that reflected who I truly was. Now, I had the freedom to do that. As the business continued to thrive, I shifted my focus toward building my own ventures. I launched a digital marketing agency, using the skills and knowledge I had honed over the years to help other businesses navigate the ever-changing landscape of the online world. I didn't have to follow in my father's footsteps anymore. I could carve my own path. The success of the agency wasn't immediate, but it was steady. I had learned how to work through challenges and come out the other side stronger. And as I gained more clients and expanded my network, I found that I was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. I had found my confidence, and that was the most valuable thing I could have ever achieved. A few years later, as the digital marketing agency began to flourish, I returned to my family's business, not as a savior, but as a partner. It wasn't about saving them anymore. It was about collaborating and making sure that the company was positioned for long-term success. My father, who had once been so hesitant, was now willing to let me take the reins when necessary. He had seen that I was capable of more than just running a business. I had the vision to lead it into the future. That moment was a full-circle realization. It wasn't just about proving myself to my family or fixing their mistakes. It was about creating something meaningful for myself, for the business, and for the people who believed in me. I had found my place in the world, and it wasn't in anyone's shadow. The final moment of validation came when my first painting, the one that had once been dismissed as a mere hobby, sold for $100,000. It was a reminder that my creative side, the part of me that had been suppressed for so long, was not just valid, but vital to who I was. The painting wasn't just a financial gain. It was a symbol of the journey I had taken to find my own voice, my own worth, and my own path. I had finally come full circle. The business was thriving. My family and I had found common ground, and I had rediscovered the passion for life that I had once been told to suppress. The road had been long, but it had been worth every moment of struggle, every fight, and every sacrifice. In the end, it was never about proving my worth to anyone else. It was about proving it to myself. And in doing so, I had built not just a business, but a legacy of my own.